Maya Johnson, one of the most formidable and respected black CEOs in the world, was no stranger to high-stakes negotiations or the heavy scrutiny that often accompanied her presence in boardrooms dominated by long-standing traditions and unspoken biases. She had spent years building an empire from scratch, transforming a modest tech startup into a global powerhouse valued in the billions, all while navigating the relentless pressures that came with breaking barriers no one had dared to challenge before. On this particular day, she was at the threshold of finalizing what would be the most monumental deal of her career, a $2.8 billion merger that would not only cement her company's position as an industry leader, but also redefine the landscape of corporate innovation. The venue for this historic negotiation was a world-renowned luxury hotel, a place where exclusivity and prestige were as much part of the experience as the impeccable service and grandiose surroundings. Maya had chosen the location deliberately, recognizing that the setting would underscore the magnitude of the deal and the level of professionalism expected from all parties involved. Yet as she entered the opulent lobby, dressed impeccably in a tailored navy suit that reflected her authority and sophistication, she immediately sensed an undercurrent of unease, not from the deal itself, but from the subtle, almost imperceptible shifts in the way the staff and a few onlookers regarded her. The moment she reached the front desk and presented her signature black credit card, a symbol reserved for only the most elite clients, one that conveyed not just immense financial power, but also a status earned through achievement and influence, the expression on the clerk's face changed. His smile, initially polite and routine, faltered, replaced by a flicker of skepticism that rippled like a shadow across his features. Behind him, a few hotel employees exchanged glances, their eyes narrowing, in a manner that was anything but welcoming. A hushed murmur rose among the bystanders, a few whispered words, a barely concealed smirk here, a doubtful glance there, subtle yet sharp enough to pierce through the professional veneer Maya had worked so hard to cultivate. The room, filled with the polished elegance of marble floors, crystal chandeliers and plush furnishings, suddenly felt colder, less inviting, as if her very presence challenged an unspoken status quo. It was not the first time Maya had encountered such disdain. Throughout her ascent, she had weathered countless moments where her competence and authority were questioned simply because of the color of her skin and the fact that she was a black woman in a space where such representation was still all too rare. But this moment, on the cusp of sealing a multi-billion-dollar deal, felt like a deliberate test of her resolve, a reminder from those who could not see beyond their own prejudices that her success was inconvenient, her power threatening. Despite the sting of humiliation, Maya's face remained composed, her eyes steady and unyielding as she carefully masked the wave of frustration rising within her. She knew that this was more than a slight about a credit card. It was an attempt to undermine her legitimacy, to question whether she truly belonged in this rarefied world of corporate titans. But she also understood that conceding to such baseless judgment would not only weaken her position, but also set a dangerous precedent, not just for herself, but for all those who looked up to her as a symbol of possibility and change. Drawing on the deep well of strength she had cultivated over years of overcoming obstacles, Maya met the clerk's doubtful gaze with a calm but unmistakable confidence. Without a word, she placed the card firmly on the counter, allowing its weight and significance to speak louder than any explanation she might offer. The silence that followed was thick with tension, as if the room itself was holding its breath, waiting to see whether she would be accepted or rejected. To her credit, the clerk recovered, processing the card with a forced professionalism that barely concealed his lingering disbelief, and handed her the key card to the suite prepared for the meeting. But the damage was done. The subtle smirks and sideways glances were not easily erased, and Maya could feel the weight of their assumptions hanging over her like an invisible barrier. Yet, rather than let this experience derail her, she chose to channel her energy into what truly mattered, the impending negotiation that could change the trajectory of her company and her career. Every step she took toward the elevator was measured, deliberate, and resolute, a physical manifestation of the determination burning within her to rise above the petty prejudices and prove once again that her worth was not defined by the ignorance of others, but by her own vision, skill, and unrelenting ambition. As the elevator doors closed behind her, shutting out the murmurs of the lobby, Maya allowed herself a brief moment to breathe deeply and prepare for the battle ahead. She was acutely aware that the $2.8 billion deal was not just a financial milestone, but a symbolic victory in a world that too often sought to diminish her presence and achievements. This was her moment to shatter expectations and to remind everyone involved, not only the hotel staff but the executives waiting upstairs, that respect was not a privilege granted by status or skin color, but a right earned through excellence, integrity, and courage. Arriving at the executive suite, Maya was greeted by representatives from the merging company, their expressions a mixture of admiration and tentative curiosity. Some were clearly aware of the subtle incident at the hotel. Front desk and others pretended ignorance, but none could deny the aura of authority and resilience she radiated. As the negotiations commenced, Maya drew upon every ounce of her experience and strategic acumen, navigating complex financial discussions with clarity and precision. Yet beneath the surface of contracts and numbers, the memory of the snub lingered, fueling her resolve to not only succeed, but to redefine the power dynamics that had sought to hold her back. Throughout the hours of deliberations, Maya remained unwavering, her voice steady and commanding as she articulated a vision for the merger that promised not just profit, but transformation, an inclusive future where diversity was a strength, and innovation thrived through fresh perspectives. The weight of her presence was undeniable, commanding respect through sheer force of will and intellect. The deal, once seen as a mere transaction, evolved into a statement of change, a challenge to the outdated norms and biases that had long shaped corporate culture. Maya's experience at the hotel became a quiet but potent reminder to everyone in that room that the barriers she had broken were not just about business but about dignity, representation, and the relentless pursuit of equity. By the end of the day, as signatures were prepared and final agreements drafted, Maya's heart swelled with a profound sense of accomplishment, not just for the deal itself, but for the symbolic victory it represented. She had faced condescension and bias with grace and strength, and in doing so, she had set a powerful example for countless others who would follow her path. This chapter of her journey was a testament to the truth that success is not simply measured in dollars or deals, but in the courage to stand tall in the face of disrespect and to demand the recognition one rightfully deserves. And as she left the suite, her steps echoing with purpose and pride, Maya Johnson knew that her story was far from over. In fact, this moment marked the beginning of an even greater mission to transform not only her company, but the entire business world, proving once and for all that no amount of prejudice could diminish the power of a black woman determined to claim her place at the highest table. Back in the hotel's executive suite, the atmosphere was charged with a mix of anticipation and unease as Maya Johnson sat across from the representatives of the company she was about to merge with, a historic $2.8 billion deal that promised to redefine the industry and catapult both enterprises into unprecedented levels of influence and success. Yet beneath the polished veneer of the negotiations, Maya's mind was a tempest of strategy and resolve rather than uncertainty or hesitation, fueled by the sting of the earlier disrespect she had endured at the hotel front desk. A moment that, while brief, had been searing enough to underscore the underlying prejudices that still lurked beneath the surface of even the most elite business environments and that would no longer be tolerated or brushed aside under her watch. For Maya was not simply a CEO chasing profit, but a trailblazer who had shattered countless glass ceilings and broken down barriers not just for herself, but for an entire generation of black professionals, women and marginalized individuals aspiring to claim their rightful place at the highest echelons of corporate power. And as the discussions began to unfold, filled with complex financial jargon, meticulous contract clauses, and the intricate dance of corporate diplomacy, Maya's focus remained unshakable, her presence commanding the room with an intensity that conveyed both her expertise and her unwillingness to compromise on matters of principle, especially those concerning respect and dignity, which she now recognized as just as critical to the deal's success as any profit margin or market share projection. The executives across from her, some seasoned veterans of mergers and acquisitions, others newer players eager to make their mark. All found themselves navigating not only the technicalities of the agreement, but also the subtle power dynamics that Maya was masterfully orchestrating. For she was signaling through her poise and every carefully chosen word that this deal was contingent on more than just numbers. It was a statement about accountability and the future culture of the merged entity, a future that would not tolerate the kind of racial bias and microaggressions Maya had just experienced moments ago, and when a particularly assertive board member tried to minimize the earlier incident as a mere misunderstanding or an isolated lapse in customer service, Maya's gaze sharpened, her voice calm but unwavering as she articulated her expectation that respect must be foundational to any partnership, making it clear that this was not a peripheral issue but central to how the companies would align their values moving forward. And while some executives exchanged uneasy glances, a few nodded in silent agreement, understanding that Maya's insistence was not an obstacle but a catalyst for a stronger, more inclusive corporate culture. Meanwhile, Maya's assistant, attuned to the CEO's subtle cues, prepared to enact a contingency plan developed for moments exactly like this, a plan that involved a strategic reconsideration of the merger's terms and the potential for a dramatic withdrawal should the negotiating partners fail to meet the standards of respect and equity Maya demanded, signaling to Maya that everything was in place for a decisive move if necessary. And as the hours wore on, the discussions grew more intense, with Maya steering the conversation away from vague assurances and toward concrete commitments, emphasizing the need for explicit policies addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion, and setting benchmarks that would be regularly monitored and enforced, demonstrating that her vision for the merger extended beyond financial synergy into the realm of social responsibility and ethical leadership. The executives began to realize that Maya was not merely a shrewd businesswoman, but a visionary leader, leveraging her platform to effect meaningful change. And as tensions simmered, Maya remained composed, balancing firmness with diplomacy, ensuring that her message was heard without alienating potential allies, and this balance only served to heighten the respect she commanded in the room. As the final hours of negotiation approached, Maya quietly reviewed the key points, mentally preparing for the moment when she might have to make the boldest decision of her career, whether to finalize the deal or to walk away entirely, sending a clear and powerful message that discrimination and disrespect had a price too high to pay, even in the pursuit of billions. And when that moment finally arrived, Maya's voice was steady and resolute as she announced her decision to cancel the merger unless the hotel incident was acknowledged, and a comprehensive public commitment to cultural reform was made immediately. A demand that stunned the room into silence, prompting frantic discussions behind closed doors as the executives grappled with the implications of losing the deal. The news quickly leaked beyond the suite, igniting a firestorm across social media and business news outlets, with Maya's bold stand becoming a rallying cry against racial bias in corporate America, inspiring countless others to challenge systemic inequities. And within days, the hotel issued a formal apology and pledged sweeping changes to their training and customer service policies, while Maya's leadership was hailed not only for her business acumen, but for her courage to prioritize principles over profit, reshaping the narrative of what it means to be a leader in today's world. And as she left the hotel that day, Maya felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment, not just for the deal, but for having turned a moment of personal affront into a catalyst for broader societal change, knowing that her fight was far from over, but that she had taken a definitive step toward a future where respect, equality, and justice were non-negotiable pillars of business and life. With calm but unshakable resolve, Maya Johnson rose from her seat in the sleek executive suite, the air heavy with anticipation and the tension of negotiations that had stretched for hours, and in a voice both steady and commanding, she announced that she was withdrawing from the $2.8 billion deal, an announcement that sent immediate shockwaves through the room, leaving the assembled executives and board members stunned into silence, their disbelief palpable as they struggled to comprehend how she could walk away from what was arguably the most lucrative and career-defining opportunity any of them had ever seen. Murmurs rippled like wildfire among the partners, many of whom were seasoned dealmakers, accustomed to negotiations that tested patience and flexibility, but none expected such a decisive and bold move from Maya, a move that upended the traditional calculus of business where profit often overshadowed principles. Yet Maya made it abundantly clear that respect and dignity were not mere add-ons to the deal, but fundamental, non-negotiable pillars upon which any meaningful partnership had to be built, and that any alliance founded on ignorance, bias, or subtle but insidious racial prejudice was doomed to fail regardless of the potential financial gain. A message that stunned even those who had witnessed her rise to prominence and her formidable reputation as a tough but fair leader. As the initial shock settled into frantic whispers and urgent glances exchanged across the table, some executives scrambled to salvage the situation, launching into a flurry of negotiations, desperate pleas, and strategic overtures designed to convince Maya to reconsider, offering concessions, promises of immediate internal reviews, and commitments to diversity initiatives. Efforts that only underscored the seriousness of her stance and the profound impact her decision was having on the dynamics of the room. But Maya's mind was resolute, fortified by years of experience and a deep-seated conviction that the moment demanded more than financial pragmatism. It required courage and clarity to confront the systemic inequities that often hid behind polished corporate facades. And as her decision reverberated beyond the walls of the suite, the story quickly spread through business networks and media outlets, igniting a firestorm of conversation and debate across industries, challenging executives and leaders to examine their own cultures and confront uncomfortable truths about racial bias and power dynamics that had long been ignored or tolerated in silence. Maya's stand became a powerful statement that transcended the immediate context of the deal, signaling an end to an era of silent tolerance toward discrimination and an opening of a new chapter where accountability and respect were demanded unapologetically, inspiring countless professionals and activists who saw in her courage a beacon of hope and a call to action. And as public support swelled and the hotel involved issued formal apologies, along with a pledge for comprehensive reforms in staff, training and inclusivity policies, Maya's leadership was recognized not just for its business acumen, but for its moral clarity and transformative impact, cementing her legacy as a trailblazer who refused to sacrifice principles for profit. Reflecting on the day's events as she stepped away from the negotiation table and into the wider world, Maya felt a profound sense of purpose and fulfillment, knowing that while the path ahead remained challenging and fraught with resistance, her decisive action had cracked open the door to a future where respect was the foundation of all dealings, and where every individual, regardless of race or background, could expect to be treated with dignity and fairness in the corridors of power and influence. And in that moment, Maya embraced the full weight of her role, not just as a CEO, but as a catalyst for change, a leader whose legacy would extend far beyond balance sheets and quarterly earnings into the realm of justice, equity, and the relentless pursuit of a better, more inclusive world for all. The reverberations of Maya Johnson's bold cancellation of the $2.8 billion deal sent immediate and profound shockwaves throughout the corridors of corporate America, igniting conversations not just about one deal or one CEO, but about the systemic racial biases and cultural blind spots that persisted in boardrooms and executive suites across the nation. As news outlets picked up the story, painting Maya not merely as a successful CEO but as a fearless symbol of strength, empowerment, and principled leadership, the public response was swift and overwhelmingly supportive, with many leaders and entrepreneurs lauding her courage to put respect and dignity above profit, sparking a wave of introspection in companies large and small that began to reevaluate their own internal cultures, hiring practices, and commitment to diversity and inclusion, recognizing that Maya's stand was a wake-up call that could no longer be ignored. Her actions forced a reckoning with the uncomfortable realities that for far too long, success had often been allowed to flourish on foundations of exclusion, microaggressions, and systemic inequity. Empowered by the momentum generated, Maya seized the moment to expand her influence beyond the boardroom, launching a series of initiatives designed to promote diversity, inclusion, and corporate accountability on an unprecedented scale, creating partnerships with organizations dedicated to empowering marginalized communities, investing in leadership development programs for underrepresented professionals, and advocating for transparent policies that held corporations accountable, not just for their financial performance, but for their social impact and ethical standards, thus demonstrating that true leadership demanded a willingness to confront injustice head-on, regardless of the stakes or the pressures to conform. And in doing so, she redefined what it meant to be a CEO in the modern era. Not simply a driver of profit, but a champion of equity, a catalyst for cultural transformation, and a role model whose influence extended well beyond the balance sheet. Rather than losing the $2.8 billion deal, Maya had transformed it into a new kind of opportunity, one built on a foundation of respect, equality, and a shared vision for a more just and inclusive business world, a deal that would set new precedents for corporate behavior and partnership dynamics, encouraging others to follow her example by demanding respect and rejecting discrimination in all its forms. And as her legacy grew, it became clear that Maya Johnson's story was no longer just about wealth, success, or breaking glass ceilings. It was about changing the entire game, shifting paradigms, and raising the bar for what leaders must aspire to in the 21st century. And through her unwavering commitment to justice and empowerment, Maya had carved out a place in history as a transformational figure who had not only succeeded against all odds, but had used her success as a platform to challenge and dismantle the very barriers that had sought to hold her and so many others back, leaving behind a powerful blueprint for leadership defined not by the power one wields but by the respect one demands and the change one inspires.